Hi everyone, we are students from Bay Path University in the Masters of Occupational Therapy program, and we are here to present on the topic of trauma-informed care in law enforcement.
My name is Allison Ebert.
I'm Alyssa Gandiaga.
My name is Viva Kare.
My name is Latifa Kubash.
And my name is Dorothy Linder. What is trauma? The Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration states individual trauma results from an event, series of events, or set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening, and that has lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and mental, physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. Soon after the event, shock and denial are typical behaviors individuals experience. Longer-term reactions include unpredictable emotions, flashbacks, strained relationships, and even physical symptoms like headaches or nausea. While these feelings are normal, some people have difficulty moving on with their lives. Types of trauma include acute, chronic, complex, and system-induced. Acute trauma is a single traumatic event that is limited in time. Chronic trauma is the experience of multiple traumatic events. Complex trauma is exposure to both chronic trauma and the impact this exposure has on an individual. And system-induced trauma is caused by a traumatic removal from home with admission to a detention or residential facility or multiple placements within a short time. As law enforcement officers, you will encounter many individuals with traumatic backgrounds. Some causes of trauma include accidents, natural disasters, domestic violence, human trafficking, mass casualty events, mental health diagnosis, substance abuse, police brutality, and racism related. To simplify the concept of trauma-informed care, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration created the 4 R's. These are realization, recognize, respond, and resist re-traumatization. Realizing that trauma has a widespread effect on individuals, families, groups, organizations, and communities, and has an understanding of different paths to recovery. The ability to recognize the signs and symptoms of trauma in clients, staff, and others in the system. Responding by integrating knowledge of trauma-informed approach into policies, programs, and practices. And finally, seeking to avoid re-traumatization.
It is important for law enforcement to respond appropriately to domestic violence incidents. This can help victims feel safe and protected. Through the National Domestic Violence Hotline, Who Will Help Me?, it has been shown that some women are hesitant to call the police for reasons they feel they will not be protected. 60% reported that they don't want to call the police because they're afraid that they will end up in worse situations or get deported. 44% are afraid from the retaliation from the abuser and the family. 22% are worried for their children, concerned that the abuser will take full custody of their child. And those who have reported sexually assault incident, 1 in 4 women have been arrested or threatened with arrest. Women have reported that officers will not believe them. I have a quote up here. It says, "They believe him every time because he did not leave any marks." So it is crucial for law enforcement to be educated on the different types of domestic violence. When responding to domestic violence incident, law enforcers should provide information about options such as safety suggestions and referral, help the survivors get a protection order, transport them to a safe place, or connect them with other victim advocates, arrest or charge the abuser, and believe the survivor or validate what happened to them was a crime. Law enforcement should also treat the individual with respect and dignity, give them their voice during encounters, and be neutral and transparent in their action. Law enforcement Agencies should also collaborate with local domestic violence programs to help connect survivors with resources that they will need.
Police interactions with individuals diagnosed with mental illness has been an ongoing issue. In 2014, police visited the house of a woman named Michelle Cozet, who had been diagnosed with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. As an order by the court, the police came to her house to transfer her to a mental health facility. She was shot when she reportedly charged at a police officer with a hammer. A man named Osao Oswaji had a history of autism, paranoid schizophrenia, extreme anxiety, and Asperger's syndrome. On March 10th of 2019, his family called 911 in fear that Oswaji might harm himself. When police arrived, they claimed that Oswaji refused to put down a knife. Officers claimed that when Oswaji walked toward them, a taser had no impact on him, so they shot and killed him. In 2015, the New York City Police Department responded to more than 400 mental health calls per day. Through the years, one of law enforcement's paid roles is to transport people suffering from mental breakdowns to hospitals. But why is this role for a population that has little to no training with interacting individuals who have a mental illness? In order to ease their distress, officers should speak slowly and use simple language. Interact with them one-on-one, because being approached by several officers may be very overwhelming and cause a mental breakdown. And lastly, consider using alternative forms of communication. This could be picture boards or using pen and paper for writing rather than speaking out loud, or even using a more soothing tone and speaking quietly rather than loudly and abruptly. Officers need to be educated in the difference between a criminal event and a mental health event.
Substance abuse has been shown to be tied to trauma exposure. So while trauma-informed care in law enforcement should utilize universal precautions, which is the notion that you should treat all individuals as if they have experienced trauma, law enforcement officers should be particularly aware of the effects of trauma when working with individuals with substance use disorders. The stigma and attitudes associated with substance use, in conjunction with some of the secondary effects such as poverty, homelessness, and risky behaviors, can put these individuals at higher chances of encountering law enforcement officers. Because of this, using a trauma-informed approach is absolutely necessary to reduce the chances of re-traumatization, ensure the individual's safety, and provide the necessary assistance and access to appropriate resources. Further, substance abuse and addiction is a mental health disorder, so the suggestions previously mentioned should also apply to this population. So trauma-informed care, when working with this population, should firstly ensure safety, should use trauma-informed language, and this image on the right has a great resource for examples of particular language and attitudes to have. So saying, instead of what's wrong with you, saying what happened to you, and ensuring safety and empathy when interacting with these individuals. Providing information and referrals for harm reduction, coping, and other health resources is essential, as well as recognizing that there might be mistrust in the system based on previous negative encounters where the individual did not feel safe or supported. This means going into the situation not with an aggressive tone, but with an open mind and genuine concern for that individual's safety and providing them the assistance they need as to not re-traumatize the individual.
I'll be discussing trauma-informed care for law enforcement in regards to police brutality and race. Race-based trauma is very real in terms of the effects that racism has on the mental health of those who experience it on a daily basis. This includes Black, African American, Indigenous, and other people of color who are put at a disadvantage because of white supremacy in America. Specifically, police brutality is an abysmal issue that should be addressed in a trauma-related lens. In a 2014 article, it published that it had outlined the changes that were implemented in policing during the past 2 decades, which has caused an increase in police brutality in economically disadvantaged areas around the country. Cities like Chicago, Los Angeles, and New York City are among many areas that have seen an increase in a stop and frisk practice. The article states that, quote, between 2004 and 2012, the New York City Police Department recorded more than 4 million such stops, end quote. More often than not, those who are stopped and searched by the police face an aggressive encounter that includes unnecessary use of force and emotional abuse. Many times, these searches occur based on low suspicion levels, which implies that a majority of individuals who face these stops have not done anything wrong in order to be searched in the first place. Such stops have an impact on mental health. Men who had encounters with the police were studied in the article and displayed a higher level of anxiety and PTSD. Knowing the current situation of police brutality, law enforcement officers should be properly equipped with trauma-informed care in order to effectively handle situations without the use of unnecessary force that continues to build on the trauma. First and foremost, racial discrimination should be openly and honestly discussed between law enforcement officers and other first responders. This fosters a necessary conversation to find the root cause of police brutality within specific communities, namely Black and Latinx populations. During a stop and frisk situation, law enforcement officers should assume that there may be trauma involved in every circumstance. Doing so adds a certain level of sensitivities to the situation. Acquiring cooperation from the individual and controlling the tone of voice is important to de-escalate the situation. Explaining the reason for the stop will minimize uncertainty on behalf of the individual being stopped. Also, giving the individual time to speak on their behalf will allow for open communication between law enforcement and the individual to encourage a dialogue and understanding between both parties.
Interviewing victims of trauma and elements of trauma-informed care approach. Why use trauma-informed approaches when interviewing victims? The main reason is to prevent survivor re-victimization. When gathering evidence during the investigation, it is necessary for law enforcement to ask the victim questions that they may find difficult to answer. Using questions formatted using a trauma-informed approach can help establish the facts and circumstances surrounding the reported traumatic event. Phrasing questions through a trauma-informed care approach will help the victim retrieve memories of the event in more detailed as they feel supported. If a trauma-informed approach is not used during questioning, the victim could feel like she or he is being blamed for their actions and are less likely to recall pertinent evidence needed. This can cause survivor re-victimization and traumatize the individual further. Implementing a trauma-informed approach in law enforcement agencies can help the victim be empowered to provide evidence and shows the responding officer is expressing concern for the victim's safety and well-being. When reframing questions, instead of asking questions that begin with why, we should begin a question using a directive such as, explain to me. Where would you like to start? Or what are you able to share? When the individual being questioned feels more at ease, the questioning officer can further push for more details by asking questions such as, and then what happened? Or, are you able to tell me more about what happened? Furthermore, incorporating the 6 trauma-informed core principles as seen to the right, this will assist in supporting law enforcement officers to conduct themselves in a trauma-informed way. This also assists with advanced training of officers, higher level management and agency employees, creating new reporting methods geared toward the trauma-informed approach, interdisciplinary collaboration within the agency and community to support victims' needs, emotional debriefing of officers, and taking accountability in treating victims with care and respect. Thank you for listening to our presentation. Here are our references.